The Darkside Detective is a classic-style point-and-click adventure game that has a great pixel art style and a pretty funny sense of humor. Not exactly rolling on the floor, laughing, but that kind of thing that'll make you smirk. This is a little out of the wheelhouse for this channel, I'll admit. Most of the games that I've covered here have been either shooters or survival horror games, with occasional excursions into the realm of CRPGs, but I'm a man of many virtual interests, so I figured it was time to take a look at a genre game that I haven't covered very much. That brings me to the game we're talking about today, a title that is an entry into that classic genre of adventure games that used to dominate the PC market back in the days prior to the release of Doom. I'm not an expert in this style of game, but I do like them, and given its overwhelmingly positive reception on Steam, I figured that a good way to get deeper into the genre would be to take on the role of... Like I said, we're switching it up for this one. Adventure games are probably one of the most interesting genres to me from a historical standpoint because of their complete resurrection. This type of game was the big dick on the block when it came to PC gaming in the 80s and 90s. Essentially an evolution of the text-based choose-your-own-adventure type stuff like Zork, adventure games made use of the advancing capabilities of graphics cards technology to add a visual element to the picture. This opened up a whole new avenue of gameplay options, narrative expressions, and puzzle design, and is probably the polar opposite of nowadays, where leaps in graphical capability only constrict games by eating into budget and development time, pulling manpower and resources away from other aspects. Back then, this was a revolution, where the new graphical capabilities of hardware actually opened up new options for game developers. Despite being largely undisputed heavyweights of the PC gaming scenes of the late 80s to early 90s, once Doom and its subsequent wave of clones hit the shelves, this genre gradually began to lose popularity until it basically completely died shortly after the turn of the millennium. Through the 2000s, there were virtually no major point-and-click adventure games, with the genre largely being relegated to the dustbin of video game history and only really staying alive in the form of flash games being made by amateur developers as freeware. With the advent of Kickstarter and the explosion in popularity of indie games in the early 2010s though, this genre returned in a big way, gaining the love and adoration of boomers who were given a chance to remember when they were young and happy, and new blood hipsters who wanted to prove how avant-garde and above mainstream slop they were. New games like Gemini Rue, Primordia, and Broken Age were released alongside with remasters of classics like Full Throttle and Day of the Tentacle, giving birth to a complete revival of a genre that many critics and players had assumed was deader than disco. Ah, fuck, that's coming back too. The Darkside Detective comes from this lineage, the product of some passionate indie devs who clearly saw this new wave of classic-style adventure games as a way to get their foot in the door. Originally made as a short demo in under 8 hours for a game jam, the prototype received a good bit of attention and helped give motivation to the devs, now referring to themselves as Spooky Doorway, to flesh it out into a complete product. That complete product is what I'm going to be talking about for the remainder of this video now that the barely relevant genre history is out of the way and I've established how smart and knowledgeable I am about a genre that I've played maybe 4 total games in, including this one. You see, when I was growing up, my earliest years were dominated by car combat and 3D platformers, and my later years were dominated by survival horror and first-person shooters. I didn't play games on PC, so I largely missed out on this genre, but my grandmother did have a few for her computer that I played back when I was very young. I can't even remember the names of any of the ones I did play, though I do remember that one of them was some kind of tie-in for the reboot of The Mummy with Brendan Fraser. I think. That might not even be true. It might have just been about a mummy. I don't know. I'll find it while I'm editing this video and put it on the screen. When it comes to video games though, I'll play most genres if I think the game looks cool. There's a couple that I don't really have any interest in, like JRPGs and 4X strategy games, but typically the criteria for me to buy a game just consists of it looking cool and like it might be fun to play. The Darkside Detective met that criteria, which was reinforced by the aforementioned overwhelmingly positive review score on Steam. Considering that means that it has 99% positive reviews out of like a couple thousand, that's a pretty monumental achievement. But enough beating around bush, you clicked on this video to hear about the fucking game and I've already gotten sidetracked twice now from giving you what you want, so I'm just gonna jump straight into it before I get distracted again. Did you know that Twisted Metal has a character named Darkside? That's pretty cool. I should really do a video on those games. Fuck was I talking about? Oh yeah, Pixel Man clicking game. So the Darkside Detective has a setup that is sorta like Twin Peaks mixed with the X-Files. You take on the role of a police detective in the town of Twin Falls who is assigned to the Darkside Division, the part of the local precinct that handles cases dealing with the paranormal, in particular a mirror dimension called the Darkside. Our guy is Steve McQueen, Francis McQueen. That wasn't actually supposed to be a joke. By the way, I literally typed out Steve McQueen by accident. Have y'all ever seen The Getaway, by the way? That's a great movie. Fuck, I'm getting distracted again. Frank McQueen is guy number 1. The other guy you've seen all throughout the background of this video, Dooley, a beat cop who tags along with McQueen on all his cases for some reason. McQueen is the straight man of the duo, both figuratively and possibly literally, while Dooley is a conspiracy theorist who deeply mistrusts the government, despite working for them in an official capacity, and is also kind of a dumbass. As someone who knows for a fact that Microsoft uses Windows to track my coordinates for chemtrail dispersal, I object to the association of conspiracy theory with dumbassery. Also, Oswald didn't shoot JFK. Anyway, the setup of the story is episodic in nature, with there not really being any continuing thread through any of the game's 6 main cases, other than a few characters that show up a couple times. Each level is entirely self-contained, focusing on a different scenario that parodies some trope of the horror genre. I'll give a brief rundown of each one that I played later, but for now, I want to talk about the gameplay a little bit. Since the Darkside Detective is a point-and-click adventure, the majority of the gameplay revolves around interacting with other characters, solving puzzles that aren't exactly brainbusters or anything like that, but they're still pretty fun and can require you to know what the hell you're doing. I'll go more in depth on them as they come up in the story, because now I'm going to give a brief description of each case I did. So there's 6 main cases and 3 bonus cases, but I didn't do those, because my policy is once I see the credits roll this bitch and getting shut from my hard drive, I'll probably play them someday, but for now let's just focus on the 6 base ones. Now that was a moody starting screen. Case 1 starts you off small and simple. Some rich family's kid has been reported missing, and you go to find her since there's suspicions of paranormal activity, trademark symbol. Since it's the very first level, it's extremely simple. The game makes no secret to hide the culprit from you, and there's only one puzzle, which is piss easy, but the point here is to get you eased in and familiar with what you're expected to do for the rest of the game. For a comedic pixel art game, this is surprisingly atmospheric. Anyway, for Case 2, you go to a library to help Dooley return some books, but obviously the paranormal thunderstorm is a concern, so you stick around a little longer to investigate both that and the librarian's report that the place is haunted. The difficulty ramps up slightly here, as it's not super obvious how to progress, and you really got to pay attention to the text boxes and environmental cues for hints on what you're supposed to do. There's one big puzzle in the level at the end where you have to fuck around with all these wires, and it's pretty involved, though not impossible. For Case 3, you're sent to the subway system to investigate reports that a train has disappeared into a portal and been replaced with a ghost train or something. The first thing that I noticed here was how good the background music was, which is a perfect segue into briefly talking about the game's soundtrack. The Darkside Detective has some great background music, all these really slow and ominous dark synth tracks that sound really good and fit the setting of a paranormally afflicted metropolis really well. If the game had a more serious tone, then a lot of these songs would be downright creepy, but as it stands in the actual product, they provide a nice bit of atmosphere to an otherwise comedic and lighthearted experience. Back to what I was saying originally, Case 3 is about slumming around the train station trying to figure out why there's all these ghosts and shit everywhere now. There's a specter taking a shit in the restroom, and once it's all over, it looks like someone was in for a surprise if they tried to use this one. Hot damn. There's not really any direct puzzles for this level, but instead a bunch of exploration and figuring out which items go where and what does what. I'd say this was probably the second hardest level for me, since you really gotta use your head to progress through this, and I've been playing Call of Duty for 15 years, so I'm not used to that kind of thing. Case 4 was the hardest level in the game in my opinion. The setup for this one is that some guy at the precinct is retiring and everyone throws a party for him, but then goblins invade the police station and start screwing with everything, and you gotta put a stop to their hooliganism. I'm a dipshit, so this one took me a while to get through. This is a pretty large map that you have to explore, and some of the solutions to the problems here are really not obvious, which I'm not saying is a bad thing, by the way, since that's the whole point. But what I'm saying instead is that if you're a dumbass, like I am, you might get stuck on this one for a while. I'm kind of ashamed to admit it, but I actually had to look up a walkthrough here. I was that lost. I will say that if you're more used to adventure games and have developed an eye for some of the weird shit they expect you to do, you probably won't have as much trouble as I did, but for cavemen like me, who mostly just solve all our digital problems by breaking shit, this one is tough. Case 5 is the exact opposite though. Not as simple and straightforward as the first one, but not as cryptic as the last level. I don't know if maybe I was just prepared to think outside the box for this one or what, but I kinda blazed through this case. The story is that Dooley has gone missing at a local park or something, and you have to work with his socially maladjusted scout troop to find him. There's a really cozy little atmosphere to this one, and the twist with what Dooley's gotten himself into is pretty funny, and a nice little twist on the monster movie genre that this level is parodying. There's a couple of puzzles that are pretty fun and satisfying to get through, and some of the solutions for how you're supposed to move forward are really clever and funny. Last but not least, we have Case 6, probably the longest and most involved one. Riots have erupted all over the city, which are obviously zombie outbreaks, but no one other than you and Dooley seem to be aware of that, and you have to go from location to location searching for clues as to the source of the undead uprising. Each of the 4 locations that you go to is kind of like its own mini-level or something like that, with a short list of things you need to do and a central problem you need to solve that all culminates in a final encounter in a cemetery where you get to the bottom of everything and save the city. You also get to play as Dooley briefly in a section that's really funny and references It, because it was 2017 and that movie was all over the fucking place at the time. That's a brief rundown of each stage and what you do in them, but I try not to go super in-depth because most of the fun of this game is trying to figure out what the hell you're supposed to do. It's a short game, I beat it in 4 hours, and I would imagine that number only goes up to like 5 if you went through the bonus levels, but this ain't like a Baldur's Gate 3 thing where you gotta clear your whole fucking schedule if you want to play through it. I liked it though. It was fun and the dialogue was funny, plus the puzzles got the old brain working. If you want a short little experience and don't feel like getting into anything that's an enormous commitment, then this is the perfect game for that. There's also a sequel out now, Fumble in the Dark, but I haven't played it, don't own it, and given how big my backlog still is, it's probably going to be a bit before I get around to that one, though the reviews look really promising, with some people saying it's even better than the first one, so if you really like this game, then that's probably worth looking into. So yeah, there you go, the Darkside Detective, the first point-and-click adventure game that I've covered on this channel. Like I said, kind of out of my wheelhouse, but this is a genre that I've been curious about for a while, and I guess I picked a good game for that initial dip into style. Even though I've mostly been focusing on shooters and horror games, there's still several other kinds of games that I'm into, so let me know if this was something that you found entertaining, and if you're went on to see more stuff from these kind of out of left field genres that I don't normally cover. Now, if you'll excuse me, there's a demonic presence in my shower drain, so I've got to go call the local department and get them on that. Hey everybody, if you made it this far into the video, I just want to say thanks, it means a whole lot. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all your standard YouTube outro stuff, and a big thank you to my patrons over on Patreon, Spec Teams 1 Slingshots and Joe Sneaks, as well as the members here on YouTube, Saiga and Grungles. Thanks a lot, y'all. And other than that, I'll see y'all in the next one. Goodbye.